Wyoming Territory, 1876. The grand windows of the Grayson ranch house reflected the setting sun like fire, while in the small cabin at the far edge of the property, Eliza Nichols clutched a letter that would change her destiny. The terse offer of employment as governess to a wealthy rancher's daughter promised salvation from the crushing poverty that had followed her since her father's death in the war. What it failed to mention was that Donovan Grayson, the territory's most prosperous cattle baron, had buried not just his wife 3 years prior, but seemingly his heart along with her. $5 a week and room and board, Eliza whispered to herself, reading the letter for the 20th time. It was a fortune compared to the meager cents she earned taking in washing and mending for the townsfolk of Willow Creek. Her fingers, cracked and reddened from lye soap and cold water, trembled slightly. Tomorrow she would present herself at Raven Ridge Ranch and pray that the fearsome Mr. Grayson would find her qualified enough to educate his 8-year-old daughter. What she could not know was how desperately he needed her, not just for his child, but for the wound in his soul that no amount of land or cattle could heal. The grand entryway of Raven Ridge Ranch intimidated Eliza as she stood waiting, her threadbare carpetbag at her feet containing everything she owned. The house was the largest she had ever entered, with polished wood floors and furniture that must have traveled by wagon all the way from St. Louis or Chicago. She smoothed her one good dress, navy blue wool, 3 years out of fashion and carefully mended, and pinned her chestnut hair more securely. "Miss Nichols, I presume." The voice startled her. It was deep and measured, belonging to a tall man descending the grand staircase. Donovan Grayson looked younger than she had expected for a man of his reputation, perhaps 35, but his face held the weathered lines of one who spent days under the harsh western sun. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and his clothes, though not ostentatious, were clearly of the finest quality. "Yes, sir. I've come about the governess position," she said, willing her voice to remain steady. His gray eyes assessed her with cool detachment. "You're younger than I anticipated." "I'm 22, Mr. Grayson, and I assure you I'm quite capable. I was educated by my father, who was a professor of literature before the war." Something flickered across his expression, interest, perhaps, or simply surprise. "And yet you take in laundry in Willow Creek." Heat rose to Eliza's cheeks. He had inquired about her, then. "Circumstances change, Mr. Grayson. Education does not." For the briefest moment, something like respect crossed his face before it returned to its impassive state. "Very well. My daughter, Margaret, is willful and has driven away 2 governesses already. She needs structure and education befitting her station. Can you provide that, Miss Nichols?" "I can, sir." He seemed to debate with himself before nodding once. "Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper, will show you to your room and acquaint you with the house rules. You begin tomorrow at 7. As he turned to leave, Eliza gathered her courage. "Mr. Grayson, might I meet Margaret today? It would be helpful to know what level of education she's." "No." His tone brooked no argument. "Margaret is riding with the foreman's son. She'll return for dinner. You'll meet her then." With that, he disappeared down a corridor, leaving Eliza to wonder what kind of child could drive away multiple governesses, and what kind of father kept such distance from his own daughter. The room Mrs. Peterson showed her to was modest by the standards of Raven Ridge Ranch, but to Eliza, it was palatial. A real bed with a feather mattress, clean linens, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and even a small bookshelf. "Dinner is at 6 sharp," Mrs. Peterson explained. She was a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes that contrasted with her no-nonsense manner. "Mr. Grayson expects punctuality. Margaret must be in bed by 8:30. Lessons begin at 7 after breakfast." "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. May I ask, what happened to Margaret's mother?" Eliza ventured. The housekeeper's face softened slightly. "Consumption, 3 years ago. Miss Caroline was the light of this house. When she passed, the light went with her." She sighed. "Margaret was only 5. She barely remembers her mother now, but Mr. Grayson. Well, some wounds don't heal so easy." "And the other governesses? Why did they leave?" A shadow passed over Mrs. Peterson's face. "The first one couldn't handle ranch life. Too isolated. The second—" She hesitated. "Margaret has ways of testing people. She tested that one right out the door after a month. Mind you don't let her do the same to you." With that cryptic warning, Mrs. Peterson left Eliza alone with her thoughts and the growing apprehension about meeting her young charge. What kind of child would she encounter at dinner? And what sort of man had Donovan Grayson become since losing his wife? More importantly, could Eliza succeed where others had failed, or would she too find herself back in Willow Creek, hands raw from washing other people's linens? Dinner at Raven Ridge Ranch was a formal affair despite the frontier setting. The dining room featured a long mahogany table that could seat 20, though only 3 places were set. Eliza, dressed in the same navy wool dress but with freshly pinned hair, arrived precisely at 6 o'clock. Donovan Grayson stood at the head of the table, and beside him, Eliza's breath caught, was a miniature vision of what Caroline Grayson must have been. Margaret had her father's dark hair, but it fell in unruly curls past her shoulders. Her eyes were a striking shade of blue, currently narrowed in suspicious appraisal of the newcomer. "Margaret, this is Miss Nichols. She'll be your new governess," Donovan said, his tone suggesting this was not a topic for debate. Margaret's chin lifted defiantly. "How long will you stay?" The last one only lasted 4 weeks. "Margaret," her father warned, but Eliza smiled, approaching the girl directly. "I suppose that depends on whether we can find things to interest each other, Miss Grayson. I enjoy stories of adventure, mathematical puzzles, and I've been known to fashion a decent kite when the wind is right." Margaret's eyes widened slightly before she controlled her expression. "I hate arithmetic." "That's unfortunate, as arithmetic is exceedingly useful for calculating how many sweets one might purchase with a given sum, or how fast a horse must gallop to reach a destination by nightfall." A flicker of interest passed across the child's face before she masked it with indifference. "I suppose you'll make me do penmanship too." "I despise penmanship. I've found that penmanship improves remarkably when one is writing something of personal interest rather than endless repetitions of the quick brown fox." For the first time, Donovan Grayson looked at Eliza with genuine curiosity. This was clearly not the approach previous governesses had taken with his daughter. Dinner progressed with stilted conversation. Donovan spoke primarily of ranch business, the upcoming cattle drive, the new breeding stock arriving from Texas, while Margaret picked at her food and occasionally shot calculating glances at Eliza. It wasn't until dessert, a simple apple tart, that Margaret finally asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "Did you know my mother?" The question hung in the air. Donovan's hand tightened around his fork, and Eliza sensed she was navigating dangerous territory. "No, Margaret, I didn't have that privilege." "Then why did you come here?" Everyone in town knows we're difficult. The blunt honesty of childhood made Eliza smile despite herself. "I came because I believe education is valuable, and because teaching is what I love. As for difficulty," she glanced at Donovan, whose expression remained unreadable. "The most worthwhile things rarely come easily." After dinner, Donovan excused himself immediately, leaving Eliza to escort Margaret upstairs for bed. As they climbed the stairs, Margaret suddenly asked, "Do you know how to ride, Miss Nichols?" "I do, though it's been some time. Father says a lady should ride side saddle, but Mother rode astride. The ranch hands told me." Eliza considered her response carefully. "There are different opinions on such matters. Perhaps we should discuss it further tomorrow." Margaret stopped at the top of the stairs, her small face suddenly serious. "The other governesses said a lady never disagrees with a gentleman, especially her father. Is that why they left? Because you disagreed with your father?" The girl's eyes widened, and for a moment, Eliza glimpsed vulnerability beneath the bravado. "No, they left because I made them. I don't need another mother." With that, Margaret ran down the hallway to her room, leaving Eliza with the realization that her job would involve far more than teaching arithmetic and literature. This child was testing not just authority, but loyalty, and perhaps trying to protect herself from another loss. What Eliza couldn't know was that from the shadows of the corridor, Donovan Grayson had overheard every word, and for the first time in years, felt something stir in his chest that wasn't grief. The first week of lessons proved challenging. Margaret alternated between sullen resistance and surprising flashes of brilliance. She deliberately misspelled words she clearly knew, but could recite passages from her mother's favorite books verbatim. She accidentally spilled ink on lesson papers, yet kept a meticulous diary hidden beneath her mattress, which Eliza pretended not to notice while changing linens. On Friday afternoon, after Margaret had intentionally reversed all her sums, Eliza set aside the arithmetic book with deliberate calm. I think we've done enough bookwork today, she said. Perhaps we should go outside. Margaret looked up suspiciously. For what? I promised to show you how to make a proper kite, didn't I? I believe the wind is perfect today. The girl's eyes lit up before she caught herself. Father says kites are for boys. Does he indeed? Eliza raised an eyebrow. Well, I'll have to disagree with Mr. Grayson on that point. Benjamin Franklin was hardly a boy when he used a kite for his electrical experiments. An hour later, they were on a hillside behind the house, Eliza demonstrating how to attach the paper to the wooden frame she'd fashioned from kitchen twine and spare kindling. Margaret, despite her determination to remain unimpressed, was soon running across the grass, her face transformed by delight as the diamond-shaped kite caught the wind and soared. Look how high it is, she shouted, forgetting to maintain her indifference. That's it. Keep the string taut, but not too tight, Eliza called, laughing as the girl made a sharp turn that sent the kite diving before it caught another current and climbed again. Neither of them noticed Donovan Grayson watching from the edge of the pine grove until Margaret, turning to show Eliza a new maneuver, spotted him. Immediately, her smile vanished. Father, she said, her voice flat again. Donovan approached slowly, his expression unreadable as always. I don't recall kite flying being part of the curriculum we discussed, Miss Nichols. Before Eliza could respond, Margaret jumped in. It's a scientific experiment. Like Benjamin Franklin. Donovan's eyebrow arched as he looked from his daughter to Eliza, who met his gaze steadily. Is it indeed? And what scientific principle are you demonstrating, Margaret? The girl faltered, looking to Eliza for help. Eliza smiled encouragingly. Perhaps you could explain how the wind affects the kite's movement? Margaret seized the opportunity, explaining with surprising eloquence how different wind currents carried the kite higher or lower, and how the tension of the string affected its stability. Donovan listened, and for the briefest moment, Eliza glimpsed something soft in his expression as he watched his daughter's animated face. Then it was gone, replaced by his customary reserve. Very well. Continue your experiment. But don't be late for dinner. He turned to go, then paused. And Margaret? Your mother would have loved this. With that, he strode away, leaving behind a stunned silence. Margaret stared after him, the kite momentarily forgotten in her hand. He never talks about her, she whispered, so quietly Eliza almost missed it. Never. As they watched Donovan's retreating figure, Eliza wondered what had prompted that rare moment of tenderness, and whether it might be possible to draw more of those moments from the man who seemed determined to keep his heart locked away. That evening after Margaret had gone to bed, Eliza found herself restless. The ranch house was quiet save for the occasional creak of timber settling. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped downstairs, intending to retrieve a book she'd left in the schoolroom. As she passed the library, she noticed a light flickering beneath the door. Pausing, she heard the clink of glass against glass. She should have continued on her way. It wasn't her place to intrude on the master of the house, but something compelled her to knock softly. Enter, came Donovan's voice, sounding tired. He sat behind a massive oak desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, and account books spread before him. The lamplight cast deep shadows across his face, emphasizing the line between his brows. Miss Nichols, he acknowledged, setting down his glass. Is something wrong with Margaret? No, sir. She's asleep. I was simply getting a book and saw your light. Eliza hesitated, then added, Thank you for what you said to her today. About her mother. Donovan's expression tightened. I shouldn't have. It only encourages her to dwell on what can't be changed. With respect, Mr. Grayson, children need to remember, especially those who've lost a parent young. And what would you know of it? He asked, though without rancor. My mother died when I was 6. My father never spoke of her again, as if erasing her memory might erase the pain. Eliza moved further into the room, drawn by the rare opportunity to speak frankly with this closed-off man. It didn't work. It only left me with questions I was afraid to ask, and him with grief he couldn't share. Donovan studied her for a long moment. Your father, the professor, he raised you alone? Until Gettysburg. The word hung heavy between them. So many families torn apart by that terrible battle. After that, I lived with my aunt until I was 18, then made my own way. He nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself. That explains your unconventional approach to Margaret's education. Is that disapproval I hear, Mr. Grayson? The hint of a smile, the first she'd seen, touched his lips. Observation only. She seems different this week. She's testing me less, Eliza agreed. Though I wouldn't say we've reached a truce yet. No, I don't imagine you have. He hesitated, then gestured to a chair across from him. Sit, if you like. Tell me what you make of my daughter after a week in her company. Surprised by the invitation, Eliza sat, arranging her skirt carefully. Margaret is remarkably intelligent, though she hides it when she thinks it will provoke a reaction. She's hungry for approval but afraid to show it. And she misses her mother terribly, though she likely doesn't remember much about her. Donovan's fingers tightened around his glass. What she remembers is that Caroline was the center of this house, that everything changed when she died. Including her father? Eliza asked gently. His eyes met hers, startlingly vulnerable for a moment. Especially her father. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken grief. Finally, Donovan cleared his throat. Margaret says you told her that her mother would have disagreed with me about side saddles. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. I said no such thing, though I may have implied that opinions differ on the matter. To her surprise, a low chuckle escaped him. Caroline rode astride until the day she became too ill, scandalized half the territory. His eyes grew distant. She was born in Virginia, but she had the spirit of the frontier. Margaret has that spirit too, Eliza observed. She could be an exceptional horsewoman with the right guidance. Donovan drained his glass. Perhaps, but the territory is changing. The railroad will reach us within 2 years. Eastern sensibilities are coming west. Margaret needs to be prepared for the world as it will be, not as it was. Is that why you hired governesses? To civilize her? I hired governesses because my daughter deserves an education befitting her station, and because, he stopped abruptly. Because, Eliza prompted. His expression closed again. Because I know nothing of raising a girl. Good night, Miss Nichols. The dismissal was clear. As Eliza rose to leave, she noticed a portrait on the wall behind him. A beautiful woman with Margaret's eyes and curls, her expression both refined and mischievous. She looks kind, Eliza said softly. Your wife. Donovan didn't turn to look at the painting. She was the best of us. His voice was rough, and I failed her in the end. Before Eliza could respond, he stood, effectively ending the conversation. 7 o'clock sharp tomorrow, Miss Nichols. I understand you've promised Margaret a nature expedition to collect plant specimens. Eliza nodded, recognizing that the moment of openness had passed. As she closed the library door behind her, she couldn't help but wonder about his last words. How had he failed Caroline Grayson? And was that perceived failure the reason he kept Margaret and everyone else at such a distance? The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for the botanical expedition Eliza had planned. She and Margaret set out after breakfast, armed with a plant press Eliza had improvised from boards and blotting paper. Father says you were in his library last night, Margaret said as they walked toward a meadow known for its wildflowers. Eliza kept her expression neutral. Yes, I was retrieving a book. Did he talk about Mother? The directness of the question caught Eliza off guard. Briefly, Margaret kicked at a stone in their path. He never talks about her with me. Perhaps because it makes him sad, Eliza suggested gently. Or perhaps because he wants to forget her, Margaret countered with a child's brutal honesty. Like he wants to forget he has a daughter. Eliza stopped walking and knelt to meet Margaret's eyes. Your father loves you very much, Margaret. How do you know? He's never here. He's always with the cattle, or in town, or locked in his study. Sometimes when people lose someone they love very much, they find it difficult to be close to others. They're afraid of feeling that pain again. Margaret considered this, her young face suddenly old with understanding. So he stays away from me because he's afraid I'll die too? No, sweetheart. I think he stays away because loving you reminds him of how much he loved your mother, and that reminds him of his loss. Eliza took the girl's small hand in hers. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. It means he loves you so much it frightens him. That's stupid, Margaret declared after a moment's thought. Despite herself, Eliza laughed. Yes, I suppose it is. Adults can be very stupid about matters of the heart. They continued walking, Margaret suddenly more animated as she pointed out different wildflowers and grasses she recognized. When they reached the meadow, they began collecting specimens, with Eliza explaining how to properly preserve them for study. It was nearly noon when a rider approached, one of the ranch hands Eliza recognized from the stables. He dismounted quickly, looking grim. "Miss Nichols, Miss Margaret, you're needed back at the ranch. There's been an accident." The boss was checking fence lines, and his horse stepped in a gopher hole. Threw him hard. Margaret's face drained of color. "Is my father all right?" The cowhand hesitated. "Doc Simmons has been sent for from town. Best come back now." The ride back to the ranch house seemed endless, with Margaret clinging to the saddle horn of the cowhand's horse, and Eliza following on foot as quickly as her skirts would allow. When they arrived, the yard was filled with activity. Horses being unsaddled, men speaking in low voices, Mrs. Peterson directing two ranch hands carrying a door that had been converted to a stretcher. Margaret, the child, slid from the horse before it had fully stopped, running toward the house. Eliza hurried after her, catching up just inside the door. Donovan Grayson lay on his bed, his face ashen beneath his tan. Doc Simmons, a gray-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose, was examining a badly swollen leg. Margaret froze in the doorway, her small body rigid with fear. "Father!" Donovan's eyes flickered open. "Margaret, I'm fine. Just a broken leg and some bruised ribs." "You're not fine. You're hurt." The girl's voice rose in panic. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward. "Come along, Miss Margaret. Your father needs rest." "No." Margaret tore away from the housekeeper's grasp and ran to the bedside. "You can't die. You can't." Donovan winced as he tried to shift toward his daughter. "Margaret, I'm not dying. It's just a broken bone." But the girl was beyond reason, tears streaming down her face. "Mother had just a cough at first, too. You said she'd be fine, and she wasn't." The room fell silent except for Margaret's sobs. Donovan's face reflected a pain that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. "Margaret," Eliza said softly, moving to the girl's side. "Your father needs you to be brave right now. Can you do that?" The child hiccuped, trying to control her tears. "The doctor needs space to work," Eliza continued. "Let's go to the kitchen and make some tea for when he's finished. Your father will need something to help him feel better." After a moment's hesitation, Margaret nodded, allowing Eliza to lead her from the room. At the door, Eliza glanced back. Donovan's eyes met hers, filled with a gratitude that needed no words. In the kitchen, as they waited for water to boil, Margaret's tears finally subsided. "I was mean to him yesterday," she whispered. "I didn't say good night." "He knows you love him," Eliza assured her. "And when he's feeling better, you can tell him yourself." "What if he doesn't get better? What if he will?" Eliza interrupted firmly. "Dr. Simmons is very good, and your father is strong. This is not like what happened with your mother." Margaret looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but suddenly penetrating. "How do you know? You weren't here." Eliza hesitated, uncertain how much the child knew about her mother's illness. Consumption is a disease that affects the lungs. It's very different from a broken bone, which can heal completely with proper care. "Father said mother would get better too," Margaret insisted. "He promised." Understanding dawned on Eliza. This wasn't just about today's accident. It was about trust broken 3 years ago when a father's promise couldn't be kept. "Sometimes adults make promises they desperately want to keep, but can't," she said carefully. "Your father would have done anything to save your mother. That he couldn't doesn't mean he didn't try, or that he didn't love her, or you, with all his heart." Margaret absorbed this, her small face solemn. "I don't want him to die alone." "He won't," Eliza promised. "We'll both make sure of that." The next few weeks brought significant changes to Raven Ridge Ranch. With Donovan confined to bed, then to the house, the rhythm of life altered. The foreman took over daily operations, reporting to Donovan each evening. Lessons continued, but often in Donovan's study, where Margaret insisted on staying close to her father. To Eliza's surprise, Donovan proved to be an engaged participant in these lessons, offering historical context to literature they discussed or practical applications for mathematical principles. His educated background, usually hidden beneath the practical demeanor of a rancher, emerged in these quiet hours. More surprising still was the gradual thawing between father and daughter. Margaret's initial fear for his life evolved into a fierce protectiveness. She read to him when his eyes tired from ledgers, insisted on helping adjust his pillows, and proudly reported each new fact she learned from Eliza's teachings. For his part, Donovan began to share stories, carefully at first, then more freely, about Caroline. How she had come west as a gentleman's daughter but adapted to frontier life with enthusiasm. How she had planted the rose garden visible from the study window. How Margaret had inherited not just her eyes, but her determined spirit. "She sounds remarkable," Eliza commented one afternoon as Margaret had gone to fetch more tea. She sat in a chair beside Donovan's desk, where he'd been attempting to review cattle records despite his splinted leg propped on a stool. He set down his pencil. "I've never thanked you properly, Miss Nichols." "For what, Mr. Grayson?" "For helping Margaret through my accident. For continuing her education despite these unconventional circumstances." He hesitated. "For encouraging me to speak of Caroline." Eliza smiled. "I've done nothing extraordinary. Children need consistency, especially in times of stress. You've given Margaret more than consistency. You've given her understanding." His gray eyes held hers. "Something I failed to provide." "You were grieving," Eliza said softly. "Still are, I think." Donovan looked toward the window, where spring sunlight illuminated Caroline's roses just beginning to bud. "I thought I could protect Margaret by moving forward, by not dwelling in the past. I was wrong. You were trying to spare her pain. I was trying to spare myself," he corrected. "Every time I look at her, I see Caroline. Every time she smiles, laughs." He shook his head. It was easier to focus on the ranch, on building something she could inherit, than to face those reminders daily. Before Eliza could respond, Margaret returned, carefully carrying a tea tray too large for her small hands. The conversation shifted, but something had changed between Eliza and Donovan. An understanding, perhaps, or the foundation of one. Later that evening, after Margaret had gone to bed, Eliza returned to the study with a book she thought might interest Donovan. She found him standing at the window, supporting himself on a crutch, looking out at the night sky. "You should be resting that leg," she admonished gently. He didn't turn. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Caroline's memory, about children needing to remember. And I have her journals. A dozen of them, from the time we married until—" He swallowed. "I've kept them locked away. Perhaps Margaret should have them. When she's older." Eliza moved to stand beside him at the window. "I think that would be a wonderful gift. A way to know her mother through Caroline's own words." They stood in silence for a moment, the night air cool through the partially open window. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, a haunting sound that emphasized their isolation. "Will you read them with her?" Donovan asked suddenly. "When the time comes." "I'm not sure Of course," Eliza answered without hesitation, then realized what she was promising. "That is, if I'm still, I hope you will be." His voice was low, almost intimate in the darkened room. "You've brought something back to this house that I thought was lost forever." "What's that?" He turned to face her, his expression open in a way she'd never seen before. "Hope." The word hung between them, weighted with possibility. For a breathless moment, Eliza thought he might say more, or perhaps she would, but the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 9, breaking the spell. "I should go," she said, suddenly aware of the impropriety of being alone with him at this hour. "Good night, Mr. Grayson." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Donovan. My name is Donovan." She turned, a smile touching her lips. "Good night, Donovan." "Good night, Eliza." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice followed her up the stairs, warming her in ways the spring night could not explain. By mid-May, Donovan's leg had healed enough for him to move about with a cane, and life at Raven Ridge began to return to normal, or rather, to a new normal that none of them had anticipated. Lessons still often took place outdoors or in the library, with Donovan joining when ranch business permitted. Dinner conversations grew livelier, with Margaret eagerly sharing discoveries from her studies and Donovan engaging in discussions rather than retreating to silence. One Sunday afternoon, Eliza found herself in Caroline's rose garden, book in hand but too distracted to read. The roses were in full bloom now, their fragrance filling the air. She heard the tap of Donovan's cane on the stone path before she saw him. "Am I intruding?" he asked, pausing at the garden entrance. "Not at all." She made space on the bench beside her. "I was just enjoying the roses." He sat carefully, his injured leg extended. "Caroline ordered these bushes from a nursery in Philadelphia. Everyone said they wouldn't survive the Wyoming winters." A smile touched his lips. She proved them wrong, of course. She sounds like a woman who didn't accept limitations easily. No, she believed anything was possible with sufficient determination. He twirled his cane absently. Margaret is the same way. Yes, she is. Eliza glanced at him. She's been asking if she might learn to ride properly this summer. Astride. Donovan's expression grew thoughtful. What do you think? The question surprised her. I think she has her heart set on it, and she's at an age where she can learn safely with proper supervision. That's not what I asked. I want your opinion, Eliza. As her teacher, the respect in his voice warmed her. I think Margaret needs to connect with her mother's memory in ways that are meaningful to her. Riding as Caroline did would be significant. He nodded slowly. Then I'll arrange it. Peterson's son is good with horses. He can begin teaching her next week. She'll be overjoyed. There's something else I've been considering, Donovan said after a moment. Margaret's education. She's progressing rapidly under your guidance. She's a quick study when she applies herself. Yes, and I wonder if she might benefit from more formal education eventually. There's a girls' academy in Denver that Caroline and I once discussed. He watched Eliza's face carefully. Not immediately, of course. She's still young. Eliza felt a strange hollowness at the thought of Margaret leaving, though she knew such separation was inevitable for a child of Margaret's social standing. Many fine families send their daughters to boarding school. She would have opportunities there that I cannot provide. Perhaps. Donovan seemed to be choosing his words with unusual care, though I wonder if there might be another solution. One that would allow her to remain at Raven Ridge while still receiving the education she deserves. What sort of solution? He turned to face her directly. I've been corresponding with the territorial superintendent about establishing a proper school in Willow Creek. The town is growing. The railroad will reach us by next spring. There are enough children now to justify a schoolhouse. That's wonderful news for the community, Eliza said, though she wondered what it meant for her position at Raven Ridge. They'll need a qualified teacher, Donovan continued. Someone with formal education and practical experience. Someone who understands both Eastern refinements and Western realities. Understanding dawned. You're suggesting I might teach at this school? While continuing as Margaret's governess. Not exactly. His eyes held her steadily. I'm suggesting you might teach at the school as the town's schoolmistress. Margaret would attend alongside the other children, then continue advanced studies at home. But that would mean you would have your own position, your own home in town. Independence. He hesitated. Unless you had reason to prefer other arrangements. The careful neutrality of his tone couldn't quite hide the question beneath his words. Eliza's heart quickened as she realized what he wasn't saying directly. What other arrangements might you envision, Donovan? She asked softly. Before he could answer, the garden gate swung open and Margaret burst through, her hair escaping its ribbons and her dress smudged with dirt. Father, Miss Nichols, look what I found by the creek. She held up a small, perfect turtle, its wet shell gleaming in the sunlight. The moment between them dissolved as they both turned their attention to Margaret's discovery. Yet as they examined the turtle and discussed where it might have come from, Eliza was acutely aware of Donovan's proximity, of the question left hanging between them, and of possibilities she had never dared to consider. The following Saturday, a letter arrived from the territorial superintendent confirming plans for the Willow Creek schoolhouse. Construction would begin in July, with classes to commence in September. The letter specifically requested Eliza's credentials be forwarded for consideration as the school's first teacher. Donovan presented the letter to her after breakfast, while Margaret was helping Mrs. Peterson gather eggs from the henhouse. You've already recommended me? Eliza asked, scanning the contents. I mentioned your qualifications. The decision remains with the superintendent and town council. He watched her reaction carefully. You seem hesitant. Is teaching not what you want? Eliza folded the letter, gathering her thoughts. Teaching has always been my passion, but, she met his gaze directly. You interrupted our conversation in the garden the other day, before you could explain what other arrangements you had in mind. Color touched Donovan's cheekbones, the first time she'd seen him anything but composed. Perhaps this isn't the appropriate time or place for that discussion. When would be appropriate, Donovan? You've been avoiding being alone with me since that day. It was true. Despite the growing warmth between them, he'd been careful to ensure Margaret or Mrs. Peterson was always present during their interactions. Even their evening conversations in the library had ceased. He sighed. running a hand through his dark hair. "You're right. I've been a coward." His voice dropped. "The truth is, Eliza, I find myself thinking of you in ways that extend far beyond your role as Margaret's governess." Her heart leapt, but she kept her expression neutral. "In what ways?" "In ways that make me question whether I can offer you the teaching position with clear conscience. In ways that make me wonder if I have the right to ask for more than I've already taken from you." "You haven't taken anything from me," she said softly. "Haven't I? You came here as a teacher and found yourself thrust into the role of confidant, mediator between father and daughter, keeper of a dead woman's memory." His expression was pained. "And now I find myself wanting to ask even more of you." Eliza took a step closer. "Ask me, Donovan." The library door opened before he could respond, and Margaret entered, clutching a basket of eggs. "Mrs. Peterson says these are for custard," she announced proudly. "I collected them all myself." The moment shattered, Donovan stepped back, his expression closing once more. "Well done, Margaret. That's enough for pudding for the entire household." As the child chattered about her morning adventures, Eliza felt the familiar frustration of interrupted possibilities. Whatever Donovan had been about to say would have to wait, again. But for how much longer? June brought the cattle drive, taking Donovan away from the ranch for 2 weeks. Despite his healing leg, he insisted on accompanying his men to the railhead in Cheyenne, where the herd would be sold and shipped east. The evening before his departure, he sought out Eliza on the front porch, where she sat watching the sunset. "I've left instructions with Mrs. Peterson regarding household matters," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "And funds for any supplies you might need for Margaret's lessons." "We'll manage fine," Eliza assured him. "Though Margaret will miss you terribly. Will anyone else?" The question was casual, but his eyes were intent on her face. Eliza's cheeks warmed. "I believe the entire household will notice your absence, Mr. Grayson." "That's not what I asked, Miss Nichols." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Then yes," she admitted quietly. "I will miss you too." He reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers briefly. "When I return, we'll finish our conversation. Properly, without interruption. I'll hold you to that promise." His eyes held hers. "Please do." The next morning, he was gone before dawn, leaving the ranch strangely empty despite the constant activity of the remaining hands and house staff. Margaret moped for the first few days, but Eliza kept her busy with lessons and projects. They started a small vegetable garden behind the kitchen, continued their botanical collections, and began reading one of Caroline's journals together, the earliest one, from when she first arrived in Wyoming territory as a new bride. "Mother thought the ranch house was beautiful," Margaret remarked as they read Caroline's descriptions. "She says it was the grandest home for 50 miles. "It still is," Eliza agreed. "Your father has built something remarkable here." "Mother writes that she was lonely at first," Margaret continued, tracing the elegant handwriting with her finger. "She missed Virginia and her family. Moving to a new place can be very difficult," Eliza said, thinking of her own arrival at Raven Ridge, how intimidating it had seemed that first day. "But then she says she grew to love it," Margaret read aloud. "Not just because it was my home with Donovan, but because the land itself has a wild beauty that seeps into one's soul." "What does that mean, Miss Nichols?" Eliza looked out the window at the rolling landscape, the distant mountains blue against the sky. "I think it means that Wyoming changed her, just as it changes everyone who truly sees it. There's something about this place that's both harsh and beautiful. It demands respect." "Like father," Margaret said unexpectedly. Eliza smiled. "Yes, I suppose so." The girl's perceptive blue eyes studied Eliza's face. "Do you love him?" The directness of the question took Eliza's breath away. "Margaret, that's not." "You do," Margaret stated with a child's certainty. "And he loves you too. I can tell." "Your father respects me as your teacher," Eliza said carefully. Margaret rolled her eyes in a startlingly adult gesture. "Father looks at you the way he looks at Mother in the painting. Like you're something special he's afraid to touch." Eliza felt her cheeks flame. "I think that's enough reading for today. Why don't we practice your penmanship?" But Margaret wasn't finished. "Would you stay? If Father asked you to? Even if you become the town's teacher?" "Margaret, these are adult matters that I want you to stay," the girl interrupted, suddenly earnest. "Not just as my teacher. As—" she struggled for the words. "As part of our family." Eliza's heart constricted. "Oh, Margaret, That's a very sweet thing to say, but such decisions aren't simple. Why not? You love Father. Father loves you. I love you both. It's simple arithmetic. Despite herself, Eliza laughed. Human hearts are considerably more complex than addition sums, I'm afraid. Adults always make things too complicated, Margaret declared with the supreme confidence of childhood. She closed her mother's journal carefully. When Father returns, you should tell him how you feel. Mother would want him to be happy again. With that pronouncement, she skipped from the room, leaving Eliza to wonder at the wisdom that sometimes came from the most unexpected sources. The cattle drive returned 3 days earlier than expected, the business in Cheyenne having concluded quickly and profitably. Eliza and Margaret were in town when the riders came through, having gone to Willow Creek to order supplies and see the site where the new schoolhouse would be built. They were in the general store when a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, Eliza saw riders coming down the main street, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Donovan rode at the front, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. "Father's back," Margaret exclaimed, abandoning the candy display she'd been examining and racing for the door. "Margaret, wait," Eliza called, but the girl was already outside, weaving between wagons and pedestrians toward the riders. Eliza hurried after her, heart in her throat as Margaret darted in front of a loaded hay wagon. The driver shouted, the horses reared, and suddenly Donovan was there, swinging down from his mount and scooping Margaret out of harm's way in one fluid motion. By the time Eliza reached them, he was setting Margaret on her feet, his expression a mixture of relief and stern rebuke. "What were you thinking, running into the street like that?" he demanded. "You could have been killed." Margaret's excitement dimmed. "I wanted to surprise you. You nearly gave me heart failure instead," he said, his voice softening as he knelt to her level. "Next time, wait on the boardwalk." "Yes, Father," she mumbled, then brightened. "Did you bring me a present from Cheyenne?" Despite himself, Donovan smiled. "Perhaps, if you behave yourself for the rest of the day." He looked up as Eliza approached. "Miss Nichols." "Mr. Grayson. Welcome back." She kept her tone formal, aware of the curious glances from townsfolk and ranch hands alike. "We weren't expecting you until Saturday." Business concluded early. His eyes held hers, communicating more than his words. Favorably. "I'm glad to hear it." She gestured to the store. "We were just finishing our shopping. I'll accompany you." He handed his reins to one of the hands. "The men can take the horses back to the ranch. We'll follow in the buckboard." As they completed their errands, Eliza was acutely conscious of the change in Donovan. He seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. In the store, he added unexpected items to their order. A bolt of fine blue calico that matched Eliza's eyes, candied ginger that Margaret loved, a set of new drawing pencils and quality paper. "What's all this?" Eliza asked as the storekeeper wrapped their purchases. "Celebrations," Donovan replied cryptically. "The cattle brought top dollar, and I've secured a contract for next year's drive at even better terms." "That's wonderful news," Eliza said, though she sensed there was more he wasn't saying. On the ride back to the ranch, Margaret chattered excitedly about the developments of the past 2 weeks, the vegetable garden, her mother's journal, the kittens born in the stable loft. Donovan listened with genuine interest, asking questions and praising her observations in a way that made the child glow with happiness. When they arrived at Raven Ridge, he surprised them both by announcing a special dinner to celebrate his return. "Mrs. Peterson is preparing roast beef and apple dumplings," he told Margaret. "And I believe there may be a package from Cheyenne with your name on it in my saddlebags." Margaret raced inside, leaving Eliza and Donovan momentarily alone in the yard. He offered his hand to help her down from the buckboard, holding it a moment longer than necessary. "I've missed you," he said simply. "And I you." She met his gaze steadily. "You seem different." "I am." He glanced toward the house. "But this isn't the time for that conversation. Tonight, after Margaret is asleep." "The rose garden." Eliza nodded, anticipation and nervousness fluttering in her chest. "I'll be there." Dinner was a festive affair, with Donovan presenting gifts from Cheyenne. A porcelain doll with real hair for Margaret, a leather-bound volume of Tennyson's poetry for Eliza, and treats for the entire household staff. Margaret was allowed to stay up later than usual, listening as Donovan recounted sanitized versions of the cattle drive adventures. When the child finally succumbed to sleepiness, Eliza escorted her upstairs while Donovan retired to his study with a promise to join them for breakfast the next morning. The normalcy of the routine belied the anticipation Eliza felt about their upcoming meeting. After ensuring Margaret was settled, Eliza changed from her day dress into a simple evening gown of deep green wool, one of her few good garments, purchased with her first month's wages from Raven Ridge. She brushed her hair, leaving it loose around her shoulders rather than in its usual practical chignon, and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, most of the lamps extinguished. Through the windows, she could see the rose garden illuminated by the full moon, casting silver light on the blooms. Donovan wasn't there yet. She stepped outside, the night air cool against her skin. Caroline's roses filled the garden with sweet fragrance, their colors muted to shades of gray in the moonlight. Eliza wandered among them, trailing her fingers lightly over the petals, remembering the woman she had never met but whose presence still filled this house. "You look beautiful." She turned to find Donovan at the garden entrance, watching her. He had changed as well, into a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair still damp from washing. "Thank you," she said, suddenly shy. "The roses are lovely in the moonlight." He moved toward her, his limp barely noticeable now. "Not as lovely as you." The directness of the compliment brought warmth to her cheeks. "You promised we would talk." "Yes." He gestured to the stone bench where they had sat before. "Shall we?" They settled side by side, close enough that Eliza could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. For a moment, neither spoke, the sounds of night insects and distant coyotes filling the silence. "While I was in Cheyenne," Donovan finally said, "I had time to think. About the ranch, about Margaret, about you." Eliza's heart quickened. "And what conclusions did you reach?" "That I've been a fool." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "A grieving, stubborn fool who nearly lost the chance for happiness because I was afraid to reach for it." "Donovan, please, let me finish." He took her hand in his touch gentle but firm. "When Caroline died, I thought the best parts of me died with her. I threw myself into the ranch, into building something for Margaret's future, because I couldn't bear to engage with her present, with the daily reminders of what we'd lost." Eliza squeezed his hand encouragingly. "Then you came," he continued, "with your quiet strength and your refusal to let me hide behind my grief. You showed Margaret how to remember her mother without drowning in sadness. And somewhere along the way, you showed me how to live again." "I only did what seemed right," Eliza said softly. "You did what I couldn't." His voice roughened. "You healed this family, Eliza. You brought laughter back to this house." "The healing was already beginning," she countered. "You just needed permission to let it happen." He smiled, reaching up to touch her cheek. "Always giving credit to others. It's one of the things I love about you." The word hung in the air between them. Love. So casually spoken, yet so monumental. "In Cheyenne," he continued before she could respond, "I spoke with a lawyer about the schoolhouse, about setting up a proper trust for its funding, and about another matter entirely." "What matter?" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had this made by a jeweler there. I hope it meets with your approval." With hands that trembled slightly, he opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple band of gold with a small, perfect diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. "Eliza Nichols," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know this may seem sudden, though God knows it's been building since the first time you challenged me about Margaret's education. I love you. I want you to be my wife, Margaret's mother, my partner in all things. Will you marry me?" Eliza's heart soared even as tears filled her eyes. "Donovan, are you certain? What about the teaching position, the schoolhouse? The school will still be built. You can teach there if you wish, or here at home with Margaret, or both. Whatever makes you happy." He took her hand. "I only know that I want to build a future with you, whatever shape that takes." "And Margaret? Have you discussed this with her?" He smiled ruefully. "My daughter informed me 3 months ago that I should marry you before someone else recognized your worth. It seems she saw what I was only beginning to acknowledge." Eliza laughed through her tears. "She told me much the same thing while you were away. Smart girl." His expression grew serious again. "But this isn't about Margaret, though I know she'll be overjoyed. This is about us, Eliza. About the life we could build together. I love you. I never thought I would say those words again after Caroline, but I do. Completely, with all that I am. Eliza touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. I love you too. I have for months, though I scarcely dared admit it to myself. Then say yes, he whispered, his face close to hers. Marry me, Eliza. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I'll marry you, Donovan Grayson. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it gleamed in the moonlight. Then he kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded, her arms sliding around his neck to draw him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. We should probably tell Margaret in the morning. Eliza smiled. She'll be insufferable, you know, taking full credit for the match. Let her, he laughed. She deserves it. We might still be circling each other if not for her determination to see us both happy. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, the future stretched before them, bright with promise, rich with possibility. Eliza had come to Raven Ridge expecting only employment and perhaps a measure of security. Instead, she had found a home, a family, and a love she had never dared to dream possible. And in the morning, when they told Margaret their news over breakfast, the child's jubilant response, "Finally, I thought you would never figure it out," made them laugh until tears came. The joy in that moment a promise of all the joy to come. They were married in the Rose Garden that August, with Margaret serving proudly as maid of honor. When the new schoolhouse opened in September, Eliza divided her time between teaching the children of Willow Creek and continuing Margaret's advanced education at home. The following spring, when she told Donovan they would need to prepare a nursery, his face lit with a happiness that erased the last shadows of grief. Life at Raven Ridge Ranch would never be without challenges. Harsh winters, unpredictable markets, the constant demands of cattle and land. But now those challenges were faced together by a family bound not just by blood and marriage, but by the deeper bonds of chosen love. And in the library, Caroline's portrait washed over them all with what Eliza could have sworn was an approving smile, as if to say that this too had been part of the plan all along. That love, once given freely, never truly dies, but grows and transforms, making room for new love to bloom like roses in the Wyoming sun.